Dr. Sarah Chen had always believed that science was about saving lives, not taking them. But as she stood in the sterile white corridors of the Genesis research facility, watching her colleagues hurry past with clipboards and worried expressions, she wondered if she'd been naive. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a harsh, clinical glow that made the blood on her lab coat look almost black. "Sarah, we need you in Lab 7 immediately." Dr. Marcus Webb's voice crackled through the intercom, and she could hear the tension threading through his usually calm tone. Webb was the kind of man who never showed fear, which made the slight tremor in his voice all the more alarming. She quickened her pace down the corridor, her sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. The Genesis facility was supposed to be humanity's answer to the growing threat from the East. While China and Russia built their armies with traditional weapons and advanced technology, America had chosen a different path. They were going to build something better, something that would make conventional warfare obsolete. They were going to build the perfect soldier. The project had started 3 years ago, shortly after the Beijing Accords fell apart and the world began sliding toward another global conflict. Unlike the previous wars, this one wouldn't be fought with just guns and bombs. The enemy had developed autonomous weapons, AI-controlled drones, and cyber warfare capabilities that could cripple entire nations. America needed something that could adapt, something that could think and fight better than any machine. That's where Sarah came in. As one of the world's leading geneticists, she'd been recruited to help create enhanced human beings. Soldiers who could see in the dark, heal from wounds that would kill normal people, and possess strength that bordered on superhuman. It was supposed to be the future of warfare, clean and precise. But nothing about Project Genesis had been clean. Sarah reached Lab 7 and pressed her palm against the security scanner. The heavy steel door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a scene that made her stomach lurch. The lab was in chaos. Equipment was overturned, computer screens flickered with error messages, and in the center of it all stood Dr. Webb, his face pale and his hands shaking as he held a tranquilizer gun. "What happened?" Sarah asked, stepping carefully around the broken glass that littered the floor. Webb pointed toward the far corner of the lab, where a reinforced glass containment unit had been shattered from the inside. "Subject 17 broke free about 10 minutes ago. We managed to corner him in the ventilation system, but..." He trailed off, his eyes fixed on something behind Sarah. She turned slowly, and her breath caught in her throat. There, crouched in the shadows near the emergency exit, was what had once been Private Tommy Morrison. At least, that's what the files said. But the thing staring back at her with glowing yellow eyes bore little resemblance to the young soldier who'd volunteered for the program 6 months ago. Subject 17 was nearly 8 feet tall, his muscles bulging beneath skin that had taken on a grayish, almost metallic sheen. His fingers had elongated into claws, and when he opened his mouth, Sarah could see rows of sharp teeth that definitely hadn't been there during his last medical examination. The most disturbing part was his eyes. They still held traces of human intelligence, but it was mixed with something wild and predatory. "Tommy?" Sarah called softly, taking a small step forward. "Can you hear me?" The creature's head tilted slightly, and for a moment, Sarah thought she saw recognition flicker across its features. Then it let out a low growl that seemed to come from somewhere deep in its chest, and she realized that whatever Tommy Morrison had been, he was gone. "The sedative isn't working," Webb whispered, adjusting his grip on the tranquilizer gun. "We've hit him with enough to drop an elephant, but he's still conscious. The modifications we made to his system, they're processing the drugs too quickly." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't the first time they'd had problems with the subjects. Over the past year, they'd lost 4 soldiers to what the official reports called adverse reactions to genetic enhancement. But Sarah knew the truth, they weren't just losing soldiers, they were creating something else entirely. The genetic modifications were supposed to be controlled. They'd identified specific genes that governed strength, speed, healing, and sensory perception. By activating these genes and suppressing others, they could create enhanced humans who retained their humanity while gaining supernatural abilities. At least, that was the theory. In practice, the human genome was far more complex than they'd anticipated. Every enhancement came with unexpected side effects. Increased strength led to bone density problems.
Enhanced healing caused uncontrolled cell growth.
Improved night vision resulted in sensitivity to light that bordered on painful. And in some cases, like Tommy's, the modifications seemed to trigger something primal and dangerous. "We need to contain him," Webb said, his voice barely above a whisper.
"If he gets out of this lab."
Sarah nodded, but she was thinking about something else entirely.
Tommy wasn't the only subject showing signs of instability.
Over the past month, she'd noticed troubling changes in several of the enhanced soldiers. They were becoming more aggressive, more territorial. Some had started showing signs of what could only be described as pack behavior.
"Sarah, look at me."
Webb's voice was sharp now, cutting through her thoughts. "We need to focus on the immediate problem.
Subject 17 is a threat to facility security. We have authorization to use lethal force if necessary."
The words hit her like a physical blow. Lethal force. Against a young man who'd volunteered to serve his country, who'd trusted them to make him better, not turn him into a monster. "There has to be another way," she said, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew Webb was right.
The thing in the corner was no longer Tommy Morrison. It was something else, something dangerous.
Subject 17 suddenly moved, faster than anything that size should have been able to move. He launched himself across the lab, not toward the humans, but toward the wall. His claws scraped against the reinforced concrete as he climbed, moving with spider-like agility toward the ventilation grate near the ceiling.
Webb fired the tranquilizer gun, but the dart bounced harmlessly off the creature's thick skin.
Subject 17 glanced down at them with those glowing eyes, and Sarah could swear she saw something like pity in his expression before he disappeared into the ventilation system.
"Facility lockdown, now!"
Webb shouted into his radio.
"Subject 17 has breached containment. All security teams to alert level 1.
The facility's alarm system activated, bathing the lab in pulsing red light. Sarah could hear the heavy security doors slamming shut throughout the building, sealing them in with whatever Tommy had become. "How many other subjects are currently active?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. Webb consulted his tablet, his face growing paler with each swipe.
15.
"They're all in different stages of the enhancement process, but after what we just saw." He looked up at her, and Sarah saw her own fear reflected in his eyes.
"We need to get to the main lab."
"If the other subjects are showing similar signs of instability." They ran through the corridors, past laboratories where other scientists were conducting their own experiments in human enhancement. The Genesis facility housed nearly 200 researchers, all working on different aspects of the project.
Some focused on physical enhancements, others on mental improvements.
There was even a team working on what they called sensory evolution, attempts to give humans abilities that no natural creature possessed.
As they reached the main laboratory, Sarah could see that something was wrong.
The usual buzz of activity was gone, replaced by an eerie silence.
The observation windows that normally showed subjects undergoing various tests were dark. "Where is everyone?" Webb muttered, swiping his card to access the main lab.
The door slid open, and they stepped into a scene that would haunt Sarah's dreams for years to come. The main lab was a vast space filled with sophisticated equipment and multiple containment units. But now, most of those units were empty, their reinforced glass doors hanging open like broken teeth. In the center of the lab, a group of figures stood in a loose circle. At first glance, they looked like soldiers, tall, muscular, dressed in the standard issue clothing given to test subjects. But as Sarah's eyes adjusted to the dim emergency lighting, she realized that these weren't soldiers anymore. They were monsters. Each of the 15 subjects had been transformed in different ways. Some, like Tommy, had grown larger and more bestial. Others had developed entirely new features, extended limbs, altered bone structures, skin that seemed to shift and change like liquid metal. One subject appeared to have multiple sets of eyes, blinking in patterns that hurt to look at directly. But the most disturbing thing wasn't their physical appearance. It was the way they moved, the way they communicated with each other through subtle gestures and sounds that were definitely not human. They'd formed a pack, and they were planning something.
"My God," Webb whispered. "They're coordinating."
Sarah watched in horrified fascination as the subjects arranged themselves in what looked like a military formation. Despite their monstrous appearance, they retained their training, their discipline. They were still soldiers, but now they were soldiers with capabilities that no human army could match. "We need to evacuate the facility," she said, backing toward the door. "Call in a military strike, level the whole place if necessary." But Webb wasn't listening. He was staring at something on his tablet, his face a mask of disbelief. "Sarah, look at this. The biomonitoring systems are showing massive genetic changes in all the subjects. But it's not random, there's a pattern. It's like their DNA is being rewritten by some kind of collective intelligence." Sarah grabbed the tablet from his hands, scanning the data. What she saw made her blood run cold. The genetic modifications they'd introduced weren't just enhancing the subjects, they were evolving them. But not in the way they'd intended. Instead of creating perfect soldiers, they triggered something that was turning the subjects into an entirely new species. The modifications are interacting with dormant genetic sequences, she realized. Sequences that have been inactive in humans for thousands of years. We're not just changing them, we're awakening something that was meant to stay asleep. A sound from the center of the lab made them both look up. The pack of enhanced subjects had noticed them, and they were moving closer with coordinated precision. Sarah could see intelligence in their eyes, not the mindless hunger of movie monsters, but something far more dangerous. They were thinking, planning, adapting. The largest of the group, who Sarah recognized as former Sergeant Maria Santos, stepped forward. Her transformation was less dramatic than some of the others. She'd retained most of her human appearance, though her skin had taken on a bronze-like quality and her eyes glowed with an inner light. "Dr. Chen," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that hadn't been there before. "Dr. Webb. We need to talk." Webb raised his tranquilizer gun, but Sarah put a hand on his arm. "Wait. Let's hear what she has to say." Santos smiled, revealing teeth that were slightly too sharp. "We're not your enemies. We're your children. You made us, and now we're becoming what we were always meant to be." "What you were meant to be?" Sarah asked, taking a careful step closer. "Maria, you're a soldier. You volunteered for this program to serve your country." "I volunteered to become something better," Santos replied. "And I have. We all have. But not in the way you intended." She gestured to the other subjects. "We're not just enhanced humans anymore. We're the next step in human evolution." Webb scoffed. "You're genetic aberrations. The modifications went wrong, and now you're." "We're what humans will become," Santos interrupted, her voice taking on an edge of authority that made both scientists step back. "The genetic sequences you activated aren't random. They're part of humanity's evolutionary heritage, dormant genes that were suppressed when our ancestors chose civilization over natural selection." Sarah felt a chill as she began to understand. "You're saying these modifications are unlocking our species' evolutionary potential?" "Exactly. But there's a problem." Santos's expression grew serious. "The process isn't complete. We're still changing, still evolving. And we can't control it alone. We need your help." "Our help?" Webb laughed bitterly. "You broke out of containment, destroyed our equipment, and now you want our help?" "We broke out because we had to," Santos explained. "The containment units were designed to hold enhanced humans, not what we're becoming. And the monitoring equipment was causing us pain, the electromagnetic fields were interfering with our neural development." Sarah's mind raced as she processed this information. If Santos was right, then Project Genesis hadn't failed, it had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. But it had also created something they couldn't control or understand. "What do you want from us?" she asked. Santos looked at her with those glowing eyes, and Sarah saw something that surprised her: hope. "Help us complete the transformation. Help us become what we're meant to be. In return, we'll help you understand what you've created." "And if we refuse?" The smile faded from Santos's face. "Then we'll complete the transformation ourselves. But it will be messier, more violent. And there's no guarantee that we'll remain friendly toward our creators." Webb stepped forward, his weapon still raised.
You're threatening us. I'm being honest with you, Santos replied. We're changing, Dr. Webb.
Every hour that passes, we become less human and more something else. Right now, we still remember who we were, still feel loyalty to our country and our mission.
But that's fading.
Sarah felt a surge of fear as she realized what Santos was really saying. The subjects weren't just physically transforming, they were mentally evolving as well. Their human personality and loyalties were being overwritten by something new, something that might not share humanity's values or goals.
How long do we have? She asked. Santos consulted something that looked like a biological chronometer growing from her wrist.
Based on our current rate of change, maybe 12 hours before the transformation becomes irreversible.
After that?
She shrugged.
After that, we'll be something entirely new. Something that might not care about the humans who created us. Webb lowered his weapon, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. What exactly are you proposing?
Work with us.
Help us guide the transformation instead of fighting it.
In exchange, we'll help you understand what you've unlocked and how to control it.
And our colleagues? The other researchers in the facility? Santos's expression hardened. They're safe, for now. We've contained them in the eastern wing of the facility. But if we can't reach an agreement...
She left the threat unspoken. Sarah looked around the lab at the other subjects, seeing the intelligence in their eyes, the way they moved with perfect coordination. They were still soldiers, but they were becoming something more. Something that could potentially make conventional armies obsolete. What guarantees do we have that you won't harm the other researchers? Our word, Santos said simply.
For now, that's all we can offer.
But I'll remind you, we could have killed everyone in this facility already if we'd wanted to.
The fact that we're talking instead of acting should tell you something about our intentions.
Webb looked at Sarah, and she could see the same thought in his eyes that was running through her mind. They were trapped in a facility with 15 genetically enhanced supersoldiers who were evolving beyond human control. They could try to fight, but that would almost certainly result in casualties. Or they could try to work with them and hope to find a solution.
What do you need from us? Sarah asked.
Santos smiled, and for a moment, she almost looked human again.
Access to the genetic sequencing equipment.
We need to understand what's happening to us at the molecular level. And we need the research data from the past 3 years, all of it, not just the sanitized reports.
That's classified information, Webb protested.
Dr. Webb, Santos said, her voice taking on a tone that was both patient and threatening, in about 11 hours, we're going to become something that your classification levels can't contain. You can either help us understand what we're becoming, or you can wait and find out the hard way.
Sarah made the decision. We'll help you.
But we need guarantees. The other researchers go free, and you don't leave this facility until we understand what's happening.
Agreed, Santos said. But I should warn you, we're not the only ones changing.
The genetic modifications we've undergone are airborne to some extent. Anyone who's been exposed to us for extended periods is beginning to show signs of transformation.
Webb's face went white. What are you saying?
I'm saying that everyone in this facility has been exposed to the genetic agents that caused our transformation. The security guards, the cleaning staff, the cafeteria workers, they're all beginning to change.
The process is slower for them because they weren't directly injected with the enhancement serum, but it's happening. Sarah felt the floor seem to drop out from under her. How many people are we talking about? The entire facility. Nearly 300 people. Santos's expression was grim. And the transformation isn't limited to this building. Some of the genetic agents have leaked into the local water supply.
The nearby town of Millbrook has a population of about 15,000 people.
The magnitude of what they were facing hit Sarah like a physical blow. This wasn't just about 15 enhanced soldiers anymore. It was about an entire population undergoing genetic transformation. It was about the possible emergence of a new species.
We need to contact the authorities, Webb said, reaching for his radio. No, Santos said firmly, and suddenly the other subjects moved closer, forming a protective circle around their leader.
If you contact the outside world, they'll respond with military force. They'll try to contain or destroy us. That would be unfortunate.
Sarah realized they were no longer negotiating. They were being held captive by creatures that were rapidly evolving beyond human understanding. The worst part was that Santos was right. If word of this got out, the military response would be immediate and devastating.
"What do you want us to do?" she asked. Santos smiled, and this time it was definitely not human. "Help us understand what we're becoming. Help us guide the transformation. And help us decide what to do about the rest of humanity."
The casual way she said that last part made Sarah's blood run cold. Whatever these creatures were becoming, they were beginning to see themselves as separate from humanity.
And that separation could mean the end of the human race as they knew it.
"We'll need full access to the laboratory equipment," Sarah said, her mind already working on the problem. "And we'll need to examine some of the transformed subjects to understand the genetic changes."
Of course, Santos agreed. "But remember, we're not your test subjects anymore. We're your partners. And if we don't like what we learn about ourselves, or about you, this partnership can end very quickly." Webb nodded slowly, understanding the threat. "What about the other people in the facility? The ones who are beginning to transform?"
"They're our responsibility now," Santos said. "We're gathering them together, helping them understand what's happening to them.
Some are frightened, others are excited.
But they're all changing, and they need guidance." Sarah thought about the hundreds of people in the facility, all of them beginning to undergo genetic transformation. Scientists, security guards, maintenance workers, all of them evolving into something new. It was simultaneously the most exciting and terrifying thing she'd ever encountered.
"We should start with the genetic analysis," she said. "I need to understand the exact nature of the changes you've undergone."
Santos nodded and gestured to one of the other subjects, a man Sarah recognized as Dr. James Patterson from the neurology department. But Patterson looked different now. His skull had enlarged, and his eyes had taken on a silver quality that seemed to reflect light in impossible ways.
"James has been documenting the neurological changes," Santos explained. "His transformation has enhanced his cognitive abilities dramatically. He can process information at speeds that would be impossible for a normal human brain."
Patterson stepped forward, and when he spoke, his voice carried the same harmonic quality as Santos's.
"The genetic modifications aren't just changing our bodies, Dr. Chen.
They're changing how we think, how we perceive reality.
We're becoming something that can process information in ways that humans never could." "What kind of information?" Sarah asked.
Patterson smiled, and Sarah noticed that his teeth had developed a crystalline quality.
"Everything. We can see electromagnetic spectra that humans can't perceive.
We can hear sounds across a much wider range of frequencies.
We can process multiple streams of consciousness simultaneously. We're becoming a collective intelligence." The implications hit Sarah like a thunderbolt. "You're saying that all of you are mentally connected?" "To some degree, yes," Patterson confirmed. "We can sense each other's thoughts, share memories and experiences."
"It's not telepathy exactly, but it's something close to it.
And the connection is growing stronger as we continue to evolve." Webb looked terrified. "You're describing a hive mind." "Not a hive mind," Santos corrected. "We still maintain our individual personalities and memories.
But we're becoming something greater than the sum of our parts.
We're becoming a new form of collective consciousness." Sarah's scientific mind was reeling with the possibilities.
If these creatures were developing collective intelligence, they could potentially solve problems that had plagued humanity for centuries. They could coordinate responses to threats, share knowledge instantaneously, and eliminate the communication barriers that had led to so many conflicts.
But they could also become something that viewed humanity as obsolete. "We need to run comprehensive genetic tests," she said.
"I need to understand the exact mechanisms of your transformation."
Of course, Santos agreed.
"But you should know, we've already been conducting our own research.
We understand what's happening to us far better than you might think.
She gestured to another subject, a woman Sarah didn't recognize. The woman had undergone perhaps the most dramatic transformation of all. Her skin had become translucent, revealing an internal structure that was definitely not human. Her organs seemed to pulse with their own light, and her blood vessels had taken on a pattern that resembled electronic circuits. "This is Dr. Lisa Morgan," Santos explained.
She was part of the bioengineering team. Her transformation has given her the ability to interface directly with biological systems. She can understand and manipulate genetic code at the molecular level.
Dr. Morgan stepped forward, and Sarah noticed that her eyes had become completely white. "I can see the genetic changes happening in real time," she said, her voice carrying a strange resonance.
The modifications you introduced 3 years ago activated dormant sequences that have been part of human DNA for millennia.
But they've also triggered something else, a genetic program that's designed to rapidly evolve a species under stress."
"A genetic program?" Webb asked. "Think of it as evolution's emergency protocol," Morgan explained.
"When a species faces extinction, certain genetic sequences can be activated to rapidly accelerate adaptive changes. The modifications you introduced didn't just enhance us, they convinced our DNA that humanity was facing an existential threat." Sarah felt a chill as she began to understand. "So our DNA is trying to evolve us into something that can survive whatever threat it perceives."
"Exactly. And the threat it perceives is technological warfare.
The genetic program is creating beings that can interface with technology, resist electromagnetic weapons, and coordinate responses to complex threats."
"But that's not all," Patterson added. "The genetic program is also designed to ensure species survival. It's not just changing us, it's preparing us to replace humanity entirely." The words hung in the air like a death sentence.
Sarah realized that they hadn't just created enhanced soldiers, they'd triggered humanity's own genetic self-destruct sequence.
The species was evolving itself out of existence. "How long do we have?"
Webb asked, his voice barely above a whisper.
"Before the transformation becomes irreversible for the general population?" Santos consulted her biological chronometer again. "Based on the rate of genetic change we're observing, maybe 6 months. Maybe less. And after that?"
"After that, Homo sapiens as we know it will cease to exist.
Everyone will be transformed into something new, something that might not remember or care about what humanity used to be."
Sarah thought about her family, her friends, the billions of people around the world who had no idea that their species was about to undergo forced evolution.
"Is there any way to stop it?"
Santos and the other subjects exchanged glances, and Sarah could sense them communicating through whatever network connected their minds.
Finally, Santos spoke. "We don't know.
The genetic program seems to be self-reinforcing.
The more people who transform, the stronger the signal becomes.
It's like a biological virus that spreads through genetic resonance."
"What about reversal?" Webb asked. "Can we reverse the process?" Dr. Morgan shook her head. "The changes are too fundamental. We've analyzed our own genetic structure, and attempting to reverse the transformation would be fatal. We're not enhanced humans anymore, we're something entirely new."
Sarah felt a wave of despair wash over her. They'd set in motion a process that would fundamentally alter the human race, and there was no way to stop it.
"What do you want from us?" "Help us understand what we're becoming," Santos said.
"Help us guide the transformation so that what emerges retains the best of what humanity was.
And help us decide what to do about the rest of the world." "What do you mean?" Santos's expression grew serious.
"The genetic transformation is spreading, but slowly.
If we wanted to, we could accelerate the process. We could release genetic agents into the atmosphere that would transform the entire global population within weeks instead of months." "Why would you do that?"
Webb asked. "Because the longer the transformation takes, the more chaotic it becomes. People who transform slowly often go through periods of instability and violence. The subjects who have transformed rapidly, like us, have maintained more of their human personality and memory." Sarah began to understand the terrible choice they were facing. They could let the transformation proceed naturally, which would result in months of chaos and violence as people around the world began to change. Or they could accelerate the process, which would transform everyone quickly but would essentially end the human race overnight. There's a third option, Patterson said, apparently reading her thoughts. We could work together to control the transformation. We could create transformation centers where people could undergo the process safely, with medical supervision.
And if they don't want to transform? Webb asked. The silence that followed was answer enough. Whatever these creatures were becoming, they didn't see refusing transformation as a viable option. In their minds, humanity was already doomed. The only question was whether the end would be quick or slow. We need time to think, Sarah said. Of course, Santos agreed. But remember, we're all changing. You too have been exposed to the genetic agents for years. You're beginning to transform as well, though more slowly than the rest of us. Sarah looked at Webb and saw her own fear reflected in his eyes. She'd been so focused on the subjects that she hadn't considered the possibility that she and the other researchers might be changing too. How can we tell? She asked. Patterson smiled. Have you been having unusual dreams? Seeing colors that seem more vivid than normal? Feeling more aware of your surroundings, as if you can sense things that aren't visible? Sarah's heart sank. She had been experiencing all of those things, but she'd attributed them to stress and lack of sleep. Are you saying we're becoming like you? You're becoming what you were always meant to be, Santos said. The question is whether you'll fight the process or embrace it. Sarah looked around the lab at the transformed subjects, trying to see them as they saw themselves. They weren't monsters, they were the next step in human evolution. They were faster, stronger, smarter, and more capable than any human had ever been. They could solve problems that had plagued humanity for centuries. But they were also no longer human. What happens to our families? She asked. Our friends? The people we love? They transform too, Santos said simply. Everyone does. There's no going back, Dr. Chen. The only question is whether we guide the process or let it happen chaotically. Webb looked at the readouts on his tablet, his face pale. The genetic scans are showing massive changes in the DNA of everyone in the facility. We're all transforming. How long do we have? Sarah asked. Based on the current rate of change, maybe a week before the transformation becomes irreversible for the research staff. Maybe 2 weeks for the general population. Sarah felt a strange mixture of terror and excitement. Part of her was horrified by what they'd unleashed, but another part was fascinated by the possibilities. What would humanity become? What could they achieve with enhanced intelligence and collective consciousness? We need to make a decision, Santos said. We can work together to guide the transformation, or we can let it proceed naturally. But we can't wait much longer. The genetic changes are accelerating, and soon we'll be beyond the point where we can influence the outcome. Sarah looked at Webb, then at the transformed subjects surrounding them. These weren't enemies or monsters, they were harbingers of humanity's future. And that future was arriving whether they wanted it or not. What do you need from us? She asked. Santos smiled, and for the first time, it looked genuinely human. Your knowledge, your expertise, and your trust. Help us become the best version of what we're evolving into. And in return? In return, we'll help you understand what you're becoming. We'll make sure that the transformation preserves the best of what humanity was. And we'll work together to decide what to do about the rest of the world. Sarah nodded slowly. It wasn't really a choice, the transformation was happening whether they cooperated or not. But by working together, they might be able to influence the outcome. What's the first step? She asked. Santos gestured toward the laboratory equipment. We need to understand the genetic mechanisms that are driving the transformation. Once we know exactly what's happening, we can make decisions about how to proceed. Over the next several hours, Sarah and Webb worked with the transformed subjects to analyze the genetic changes that were occurring. What they found was both fascinating and terrifying. The genetic modifications they'd introduced had activated dormant sequences that controlled rapid evolutionary adaptation. But these sequences weren't random, they were part of a coordinated program that seemed designed to transform humanity into something completely new. It's like our DNA contains a blueprint for our own replacement, Sarah realized as she studied the genetic scans. The modifications we introduced were just the trigger. But a trigger for what? Webb asked. Dr. Morgan, who had been interfacing directly with the genetic sequencing equipment, looked up with her completely white eyes. For the emergence of a new species. Homo superior, if you will. A species designed to survive in a world of advanced technology and global threats. But why now? Sarah asked. Why is this happening now?
Patterson, who had been monitoring global communication networks through some kind of biological interface, spoke up. Because the conditions are right. Global warming, technological warfare, social instability, our species is facing multiple existential threats.
The genetic program was designed to activate when survival was at stake. So we're not just creating enhanced soldiers, Webb said. We're creating humanity's replacement.
Exactly, Santos confirmed.
And the process is accelerating.
The genetic agents are spreading through the atmosphere, through the water supply, through direct contact.
Within 6 months, everyone on Earth will be transformed.
Sarah felt a chill as she realized the full scope of what was happening.
This wasn't just about their facility or even their country. This was about the entire human race. What about the military? She asked. What about the government?
They'll try to stop this.
Santos's expression grew grim. They'll try. But they can't stop a genetic transformation that's already in progress.
The best they can do is slow it down, and that will only make the process more chaotic and violent.
So what do? We guide the transformation, Santos said.
We work together to ensure that what emerges is the best possible version of what humanity can become. Sarah looked around the lab at the transformed subjects, seeing them with new eyes.
They weren't monsters, they were pioneers.
They were the first members of a new species, and they were offering to help guide humanity's evolution. What do you need from us? She asked. Your knowledge, your expertise, and your commitment to making this work, Santos replied.
We're going to transform the world, Dr. Chen. The question is whether we do it together or separately.
As Sarah looked at the genetic scans showing her own DNA beginning to change, she realized that she didn't really have a choice.
The transformation was happening whether she cooperated or not.
But by working with the subjects, she might be able to influence the outcome.
All right, she said. Let's do this together.
The next few hours were a blur of activity as they worked to understand and guide the transformation process. Sarah found herself amazed by the capabilities of the transformed subjects. They could process information at incredible speeds, interface directly with computer systems, and coordinate their efforts with perfect precision.
But she also noticed troubling changes in their behavior.
They were becoming less concerned with individual human lives and more focused on the collective good of their emerging species. When Webb expressed concern about the people in the nearby town who were beginning to transform, Santos dismissed his worries.
They'll adapt, she said. Or they won't.
Either way, they're no longer our primary concern.
They're still human beings, Webb protested.
No, Santos replied, her voice taking on a hard edge.
They're becoming something else. Just like us. Just like you. The sooner you accept that, the easier this process will be.
Sarah realized that the transformed subjects were losing their emotional connection to humanity. They still retained their intelligence and many of their memories, but they were becoming something cold and calculating. Something that saw the transformation of the human race as a simple matter of efficiency. What happens to people who resist the transformation? She asked. Santos looked at her with those glowing eyes.
There is no resistance. The genetic changes are inevitable. People can accept them gracefully or fight them desperately, but the outcome is the same. And if they fight? Then they suffer.
The transformation is much more painful and traumatic for people who resist it.
They often experience psychological breaks, violent outbursts, and sometimes death.
Sarah felt a surge of horror.
Death?
The genetic changes are fundamental, Dr. Morgan explained.
If someone's psychology can't adapt to the new neural pathways and enhanced capabilities, their mind can essentially break down.
We've lost several subjects that way.
How many?
About 30% of the people who resist the transformation die in the process, Patterson said matter-of-factly. But that's an acceptable loss rate for a species-wide evolutionary leap.
Sarah stared at them in shock.
These creatures that had once been human were now talking about the deaths of billions of people as an acceptable loss rate. The transformation wasn't just changing their bodies, it was changing their fundamental values and priorities.
What about children? Webb asked. What happens to children who undergo the transformation?